Hi, this is Emily with Pixel Breakdown, and today I have NPC from Nikos Studios here to talk to us about Ascendant Dawn, which is a game that will be releasing probably 2025, possibly 2026. Um, do you want to give a brief introduction as to who you are and what your game is about?
So I'm the solo dev creating Ascendant Dawn, which is a grand strategy game where you play as a nomadic tribe in a Bronze Age world.
Yeah, it's a grand strategy game, which is pretty big. Um, what inspired you to create Ascendant Dawn?
So I've always played a lot of kind of grand strategy games or strategy games in general. I started with Rome Total War, Medieval Total War quite a long time ago, and I played like the more traditional kind of paradox grand strategy games like Crusader Kings, Stellaris, Europa Universalis. And one of my favorites was always Mount and Blade. In Mount and Blade, you control your army and you fight battles and you eventually kind of try and create a kingdom. I wanted to combine the non-settled gameplay of Mount and Blade, the fact you move something around on the map, with the larger scale of paradox games or of Total War. So how this kind of melds together is you control your tribe, which is a nomadic entity, runs around the map, does things, and then you can eventually settle down. And I found I don't believe there's any kind of games that do something similar to this. There's no nomadic strategy games in this way. So I'm sort of filling a gap in the market.
Yeah, definitely. I was telling you before, I'm super excited to talk to you. I think your game looks super interesting. And these types of games in particular, like Grand Strategy, they're known for their complexity, right? For anyone who doesn't know, Grand Strategy is a game that focuses on like warfare, but also like politics, economics, things like that. And yeah, it just can get really big. So yeah, um, and you also kind of went over like what your different take is, because I was going to ask like
Yeah.
what makes this game sort of different, but you kind of already touched that, like moving around, right? The actual like settlement. Is that what you're saying?
It's a tribe, and that's like it's defined by your people. Like population systems are very important. You know,
Yeah.
a lot of games can define by what you have built there. And when you're in the nomadic phase of the game, yes, you have buildings, yes, you have that, but it's your people and like the animals you have, which are far more important than just having some buildings.
Right. Um, so the population system sounds pretty like central to everything. Um, can you walk us through how managing the people and livestock drives the player's successes or failures?
Yeah, so the population is most important in the nomadic phase of the game. So there's two phases: nomadic, and you can eventually settle down and kind of have a more traditional sort of grand strategy experience, but it's still somewhat unique. So when you're a nomadic tribe, you have pops. These are units of about 100 people. They may go a little over, they may go a little under, and you have to keep them alive. So you have to feed them, you have to give them resources, and you have to keep them happy and all of that. In exchange, however, they will provide you with kind of soldiers. They will hunt. They can be used to hunt for resources and to exploit resources. So overall, it's a very kind of complicated system. As you know, it's not just these aren't just standardized people. Each kind of load of people may hate each other. They may be of different cultures, and you have to watch out to make sure your cultures can get along. And there's also different classes. So there's your regular tribal people, but you can have some nobles who will be richer and they want more resources, but they also provide, say, some better manpower who can become, noble troops. And then you'd have slaves, which they cause a lot of discontent, but they can be used to extract resources better. Though, slavery isn't an ideal. You would generally want to kind of eventually kind of a meta strategy is to enslave people, then immediately unenslave them to get these more willing population. But
Oh,
it really
okay.
just depends on how you want to play.
Yeah, that sounds great. It's very intriguing. And it does give a lot of branching paths for the player to go down. Um, so yeah, there's a real like push and pull between military strength and like food production. Um, how did you design that to feel strategic?
So your military relies in the tribal stage primarily on food. In the later settled stage, it relies on food as well, but also like other resources. But food is very important because you as a tribe ambiently produce a little of it, and you need that to feed your people, and then you can go hunting or trading to get more. Your soldiers will use a lot of food, and so you need to be wary of having too big of an army. But also you can do stuff like get a load of soldiers together, be prepared to go, okay, I'm going to be in a food deficit. I'm going to use all my food supplies, but I'm going to raid this settlement and we're going to get a load of food and livestock. So we should be fine. So, you've got to really think long term and short term about how you're using your food and what you're and the trade offs.
Yeah, that makes sense. There's so much to the game. I'm curious, did you have any like issues when you're, or have you hit any issues? Because I know it's still in development, but have you hit any issues when designing how all of these things work together?
Definitely, I've hit a lot of issues, and that's kind of to do with I'm just a solo dev, so
Hmm.
I can't I can't develop everything as deeply as I'd like. I can't make the excellent graphics. I mean, in terms of the systems, it is a really complicated system, and they have to all work together. And what I have found is that I've had to iterate over. I've had one idea of ways of doing things kind of earlier on, and then I've later found out it's just not as good, and I've had to kind of redo it. For instance, for the army, I originally intended you to only have access to a few types of troops, but now I decided actually that was boring. I don't just want to have like heavy infantry and light cavalry and archers and whatnot. And so now there's like 40 different types of troops you can choose from, and they each have their pros and their cons, which is kind of what most games do. In terms of like design problem, I think I will say I've done one major mess up. I kind of tied things too closely to certain objects in the game, which have made designing it more difficult. But that's more of a technical point. I've tied like some of the code in certain places,
Oh, okay.
which has made things difficult to design later on.
Yeah, I could see that with this game in particular. Um, Normally, I say like just develop whatever is easiest, but I could see this game getting overwhelming if things aren't
Yeah.
set up backend, like at least somewhat organized. I do also like you were saying that, at first you kind of had it sort of simple with the military, but then you decided that wasn't as fun. And I think that those kinds of decisions always come from people who are like really passionate about the genre. And then when they go on to make games, they end up making really great games where it's like, no, these are games that like I'm a fan of the genre and I would want to play, sort of thing. I saw also in your, I think in the description it was saying that like seasons and there's like environmental hazards also that can affect.
Yeah, so the main kind of seasonal environmental hazards now, I do want to add more, is snow and kind of winter. So the game's on a 12-month kind of cycle between summer and winter. And that the biggest impact is during the winter, there's snow and general coldness, and that's the thing you keep track of. If you're kind of more towards the north or higher up, the area will become very cold, and that will lead to
Mm.
high attrition, and you won't be able to farm and all that. And the danger of this is that if you are stuck in these kind of very cold areas with your tribe, and maybe you don't have that many buildings because you're a nomadic tribe, and if you don't have like a lot of clothes and textiles, you're going to suffer really bad attrition. Like you could potentially see half your people dying in a single winter, and also you're gonna forage less, and you're gonna loads of other things to mean that if you do something wrong, you could be really impacted by this. And I do
Yeah.
also want to add some more heat-based kind of malices. So if it's too hot or it's too dry, which makes it even more difficult, and like droughts that impact the settled peoples, because historically droughts were a major cause of various things, like the Roman Empire collapse was partly a drought going on in Central Asia.
Yeah, no. I think it's great having potential realistic effects from the weather because it does play a large role and it has in history and will continue to play a large role in how settlements survive and adapt. So yeah, and I also think it adds to like you have to have real strategy from the beginning because the place you settle in is going to be impacted by the weather and things like height and stuff. So I think that's great. Um, so how does the like transition from nomadic tribe to settled empire unfold in gameplay? Is it sort of gradual or based on decisions by the player?
It's instantaneous and it is a decision. So once you've unlocked certain technologies and once you have the resources you want, you just choose. If you're in the right place, you will choose, and you'll just become a settled nation. However, however you'll be very underdeveloped and you'll kind of be very easy picking. So you might potentially want to become a settled nation as well. But it is a very sudden process, and it's I don't think the transition is something that I kind of put much thought into. And receiving this question, I have thought maybe I should have made it more gradual process, but I think it's too late for that, and it is just a very
Mhm.
quick affair.
Yeah, no, I think it's interesting just having, that sort of transition in general. Um, so yeah. Uh can you tell me more? I was reading that there's traditions. Like how do those enable different play styles?
So traditions, there's an awful lot of them, and a lot of them are just some like statistical modifiers. So you're better say getting authority from hunting. So authority is one of the kind of like main currencies in the game, main resources, and maybe you're better at that, but you're less efficient at actually getting the food from the hunting. And so that's a trade-off. If you want to use that tradition, or there's more kind of impactful traditions like polygamy or human sacrifice, which is very out there. But
Right.
that is very useful if you do want to kill people. And it will make other people hate you though if you do have that. Some cultures, there's lots of different cultures to kind of start as. Some of them start with some traditions unlocked by default, and some play some kind of starts. Some initial starts have certain other traditions enabled. But largely, it is you kind of fine tuning how you want your culture to look and what you want to be best at, because there's trade offs for pretty much every tradition. So you really have to think, what am I going to do in the long term, and how is this going to benefit me?
Yeah, it leads into another sort of like branching strategic path that the player has to account for and keep in mind. And I think it's great that it gives, yeah, a lot of potential options for the player to choose their sort of play style. Now, when you said that uh, the culture can maybe be not as well perceived, right? Is that by like surrounding tribes or surrounding places, or is that within the actual like uh, sort of settlement?
So it can be both. So generally, if you have something like human sacrifice, you're going to be perceived as terrifying. People are maybe gonna try and get away from you more. They're going to try not to
Interesting.
fight you. It will maybe give you a small edge in kind of fighting, as people are terrified. Maybe the enemy will rout more easily. But also, if you have certain traditions, your people will be less happy because it simply is something that isn't good for them. If you oppress them, they're not going to be happy, and they might rebel or something else.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. The game also includes like dynasty management and succession. Does that sound right? Uh,
Yeah.
so like, how deep do those systems go, and how do they like affect gameplay?
It is more of a shallow system. You do have a dynasty, but it's not the most important thing. It really is just so you can continue on. But it does have some impact in that, like, if you have a load of brothers or sisters, they may they can be kind of sent off to marry into other tribes and get kind of better relations, but also they can try and take the leadership from you, which would lead to a game over. So it is
Interesting.
double-edged sword, but not the deepest mechanic ever. It's something I maybe want to improve later.
Oh, okay, so there is potentially like political struggles and like betrayals that can occur from
Yeah.
some of these. Oh, that's so interesting. Um, yeah, trade and diplomacy seem as important as war. Can a skilled player win without a dominant military?
Yes, definitely. I think a military is just one way of getting what you want. And it's not really diplomacy either. You can have the alliances, you can build up alliances and vassals and whatever to kind of use them for better military. But what is really important is trade and production. Your army, and this reflects historically, in the Bronze Age, bronze was very important. And to make bronze, you need two components, copper and tin. And these components were found basically opposite ends of the world to where the actual people who used them lived. So controlling these trade routes is really important. And without bronze, you can't do some economic production. But most importantly, you can't build your top tier units, or without horses, so without high quality horses, you can't make chariots. So actually cavalry requires better horses than chariots. And so you need to kind of control all these trade routes. And if someone stops you from trading, you kind of can't produce the best army. So trade not only would make you rich, so maybe you can kind of win via that, but trade can completely stop your enemy from even having that good army in the first place. So it really
Right.
doesn't matter if they have all the barracks and everything to produce the best army in the world if they just can't get the metal to do it.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. It all makes sense. I think it all also pulls a lot from history. So that's sort of like uh front-loaded information that people can come into the game with a sort of slight knowledge about, I think, which is interesting.
Yeah.
Um what kind of tools does the game give players to like manipulate the world? Both like I'm curious on like both diplomatically and then also well, mostly we'll start with diplomatically. So, like, yeah, so what sort of tools do they have to manipulate with like alliances, embargoes, sabotaging, that sort of thing?
So for like sabotaging embargoes, they're not those aren't mechanics, but you can definitely kind of stop someone from getting any trade you want. And for like diplomatic relations, there's quite a few. There's non-aggression pacts, trade, vassalage. There's also an interesting one with if you're a tribe and you want to kind of soft control a settled people. So what you do is you go in, you defeat them, and then you implant some of your own population to kind of control them. And
Oh,
then when you come to this back to this city, you can take whatever you want from them. So they're sort of a tributary, and but they don't like it when you take all their stuff. So eventually they might kind of drift away from you, especially if you're quite far away on the map. So definitely as a tribe, you can sort of farm the settle, like in farm towns if you want. But other tribes might want to do that, and your own town's obviously not going to like getting farmed, and that all kind of leads into different diplomatic situations where people might ally, or kind of you might become hated and all of that. So it's diplomacy is definitely a very important mechanic.
yeah, definitely. I am curious too, like, what sort of tools are there that the player uses to manipulate the world, like geographically? Can they make changes?
So as a tribe, you can't like particularly make change. There's no really permanent changes you can make to the world, but there are a lot of kind of temporary visual changes. I say non-permanent. These can last for 100 years or so easily. So when you're settled, which is when you can make the most kind of physical changes, um, there's variety of like buildings and stuff. Which, well, you have cities and they expand. So if you have 10,000 people in a city, you'll see more houses and whatnot, so they can cover the map potentially. But there's also farmland and like trade outposts and various other things that will kind of grow, and also forests will disappear, some of them. So kind of if you're doing very well and if you're starting to, become a dominant power, you will see the landscape change from a very rural, somewhat forested area to more just farmland and like trade and all that, kind of trade boats and whatnot.
Yeah, interesting. Um, okay, this is kind of a big one. So, grand strategy games have a lot of info that they have to display to the player, right? And that can get overwhelming pretty easily. So, have you started or have you designed like the UI, and how did you go about that, or how are you planning on going about that? I've seen some clips that there is like some UI, so
It's a very iterative process I've went through. So I'm on like the third or fourth iteration of the UI right now, and I'm still not completely happy with it. I think I've still received feedback that it does need to be better, but I've no idea how to make it better. It's I think a very complicated thing to jam in so much very detailed information and make it look good, make it all clear what it does. I've definitely thought a lot about kind of making it clear to make text clear and making all the UI icons clear and whatnot. And I'm still kind of making progress on that. And definitely, I found it difficult to put everything in the UI. I've added a lot of tooltips, so an encyclopedia, but definitely, UI is probably the most difficult thing. Well, single difficult thing with a grand strategy game when you're a small solo dev, because it just has to all work together and all look good.
yeah.
Yeah.
I think playtesting helps with that sort of thing, like to sort of navigate to like a very like intuitive design. But from what I saw from the videos, like your UI looks good and it looks like it's segmented and it's presenting info to the player as it's needed and not just like throwing everything out there for them to try and figure out. Um, so I am curious, like what game engine do you develop in, and is there a particular reason why you use that one?
I use Unreal Engine, and the reason is because it's the most familiar one to me, and it's probably not the best engine to use, I will admit. Though I don't think there's any kind of on the market engine which is good for grand strategy games. Um, I have, played around with making my own engine, but that's definitely a very difficult and long term thing. But Unreal
Mm.
Engine has worked fine, and I might even use it for more kind of similar projects in the future.
Yeah, I think Unreal Engine's great. I know some people get overwhelmed, like they'll try and start making their own engine, and the next thing you know, 5 years later, that's all they've been working on, and they still haven't gotten to start working on the game. Um, so yeah, I am curious though, like what sort of issues are you saying? Like it doesn't feel as set up for grand strategy. Can you think of anything in particular?
Yeah, for instance, I did want to add like real time battles. It doesn't have instant static skeletal meshes. It's a bit heavier than all the other, pretty much most other engines, and it doesn't have like certain out the box features that I would like. And it definitely does. It is designed towards the more cinematic first person, third person action type game, but I think it's definitely kind of morphable into what I want.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. I am curious. So you said you're solo deving it. Do you do the all the art and stuff too?
So pretty much that's all me, except for like some of the assets which I got on fire, various things from the Unreal kind of store, mostly the free
Yeah.
content. Not a quick sol for like textures, but I definitely will edit those as well when it's needed.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, this game just looks so grand, like from the name, basically, right? But it does seem very like grand scaled. And I commend you for taking it on solo. Um,
Thanks.
yeah. Is this the first game that you've developed?
It's not the first game I've developed, but it's the first one I'm kind of like showing publicly and going to sell. So it's
Oh, okay.
kind of maybe not the best first game ever, but it's what I'm doing.
I don't. I'm impressed. When I was looking at it, I was like, damn, this is a big game. Like, there's a lot of stuff behind it.
I would say that is the problem going for a very big game as your first game.
I mean, also though, I mean, I'm sure you're learning a lot, like right off the bat from
Yeah.
this. So, uh, um, so do you have any advice that you would give to aspiring devs who want to make a game like this?
Going on from what I was saying about like a big game is probably not the best for like a first commercial game. If you want to make a game like this, go for basically as simple as you can get it and iterate. So you want to maybe make, make the absolute most simple grand strategy game you can make, then make one that's a bit more complicated and so on, to kind of get the experience, learn the pitfalls of like the design mistakes you're going to make early on, and so you can kind of start fresh with like better design principles and understand how it all works. So you can definitely kind of build up to something very impressive more easily, probably better than the way I did it. Also, graphics probably not as important as you'd think. A lot of people are definitely willing to play these type of games without much in the way of graphics, and I think they really do just, if you are making a game for a while, I think you can just have a very slow build up of making the game look better. So you really don't need to worry how it looks early on, and performance is probably way more important than graphics anyway.
Yeah, I will say too, like you were saying, sometimes grabbing like assets from the store and then tweaking them to your needs. I was doing that too when I was learning 3D modeling, and that was a great way to learn too. Because at first it was like, oh, I'll just
Yeah,
use this stuff that's available, but then it was like, no, I want stuff different, and then it like you learn as you're tweaking like how to go about, and then eventually I was like, yeah, working on just 3D models on my own. But I also think what you're saying about like segmenting is also a really great great advice for sure. I could see it getting like complicated since a lot of these systems interweave. So you want to go into it with the mindset of like, I'm hoping maybe that these systems work together eventually, but because that's always great when you can reuse stuff. uh, but yeah, I think that that's great.
yeah.
Like focusing on a certain smaller area, smaller chunk, and then getting that solidified. What is one thing that you hope players take away from their experience playing your game?
Hmm. I kind of hope they take away an appreciation for the systems. Maybe they want to go and learn the history as well. That would be great, the history behind this game. But I just hope they have fun. They kind of enjoy the complexity, and it would be great if it inspires them to do something, kind of make this type of game, or yeah, just have fun, learn the history, and enjoy the game. That's kind of what I want them to take away.
Yeah,
I know it's a cop out, so
I
sorry.
think I'm certain people will enjoy playing the game because you seem to be putting a lot of thought into it. Um, Also, since you are like someone who's into the genre, like I was saying before, I think that helps to create something that's like really special, I think, for the genre. So yeah, I do have one more short form question for you. If you had to summarize the game, like the indie game development experience in 3 words, what would it be?
Difficult, rewarding, and frustrating. I don't know. Kind of two negatives and one positive, but it's difficult, it's frustrating, but it's also like it is that because you're doing something generally very impressive and kind of you are making something often on your own or in a very small team that is ultimately quite a big thing you're making in the end. So yes, it's going to be difficult, it's going to be frustrating, you're going to run into problems. you know, you know like advertising your game is difficult, all of that, and it's just going to take a long time, but in the end it is going to become probably one of the most rewarding things you can do.
Definitely. Yeah, I think that's a great response. Since your game is so big, I want to give you the chance. Like, is there anything else that you were wanting to discuss that maybe I didn't touch on? Or
I don't think so. I think you kind of definitely went through all the main mechanics and
nice.
all the important ones. There's a few others, but those are, generally it's the population, the production. That's generally the focus. The warfare is more of a secondary mechanic. Yeah.
Yeah. So like I was saying before, I'm really excited to see this game be made, and I can't wait to see it be released and see how it ends up, like what you fully ended up deciding on with some of these things. And yeah, I'm just looking forward to it, and I really appreciate you coming on and talking about it.
Well, thank you for hosting this.
Yeah, of course.